The prairie lay quiet beneath a wide sky of burning gold. The sun sank low behind the jagged ridges, leaving long shadows across the open land. Wind bent the tall grass as if whispering secrets too old to be remembered, and the call of a lone hawk echoed somewhere above. Out on this land where the horizon stretched endlessly, and the rivers carried the songs of forgotten people, stories of hardship and hope were born. It was a time when the border between two worlds, the settlers who came with their wagons and dreams, and the Apache who guarded their homeland with pride, was drawn not on maps, but on hearts. She had come west with a hope that life might be kinder than what she had known. The girl had been raised with little more than duty, and though she wore the garments of a settler, there was a softness in her eyes that carried both fear and a longing to belong. Every step she had taken into this rugged country tested her courage, for the plains and canyons were far harsher than the gentle fields of her childhood. Yet, she had walked on, driven by a belief that a new beginning could be found if only she held fast to her faith. The Apache warrior stood across from her, his chest rising and falling with a rhythm that betrayed an inner storm. He was tall and proud, the strength of his people carved into every line of his body, and his gaze held the fire of one who had known both loss and battle. His hair fell long, tied back with care, and around his neck hung pieces of bone and stone that told the story of his ancestors. He had not asked for her to step into his path, nor had he wished for this meeting, yet the fate of the wild often placed strangers in one another's way. She trembled as his shadow fell over her, not because she did not see the man behind the feathers and markings, but because she did. There was no cruelty in his eyes, no careless desire to harm, yet there was something restless, something that burned against the quiet pleading in her voice. Her words slipped out in a whisper carried by the wind. "Be gentle. I can be a good wife." The moment hung heavy between them, more than just a plea. It was a surrender, a desperate hope that she might be accepted, that she might not be cast aside in a land where survival was never promised. The Apache's hand tightened on the spear he carried, not as a threat, but as if the wood itself steadied the storm inside him. He had seen many settlers before, their wagons rolling through his people's hunting grounds, their axes striking trees his grandfather once prayed beneath. Yet this woman was different. She did not carry arrogance in her stance, nor defiance in her tone. She was fragile in the way of wildflowers growing in the cracks of stone, fragile but determined to keep standing, even when storms passed over. Her plea struck him not with triumph but with unease. To take her words was to step into a bond that could not be broken lightly. To ignore them was to walk away from something that might change the path of both their lives. The land around them held its breath, as though even the wind waited to see which way his heart would turn. The girl's lips quivered as she spoke again, her eyes never leaving his. "I will learn your ways. I will serve with respect. I only ask that you do not cast me aside." There was no bitterness in her tone, only honesty. She had been carried far from the safety of her people, and now she stood alone, her future hanging by the strength of his choice. He stepped back, his chest tight, as if each heartbeat echoed against the canyon walls. The Apache was not afraid of enemies with rifles, nor of the endless miles of desert his feet had walked. But this quiet surrender from a woman whose spirit carried both fear and courage shook him. His restless heart warred within him. Could he take her in, knowing the whispers it would bring from his own people? Could he turn away, knowing the look in her eyes might haunt him across every mile he traveled? The twilight deepened, painting the world in copper and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, the cry of a coyote rose up, sharp and lonely. The girl's hands clutched the fabric of her dress, her knuckles pale, as if the very earth beneath her feet might give way. She waited for his voice, for his choice, and in that waiting the air grew heavy with unspoken truths. Behind his stern silence, the Apache remembered the teachings of his elders. They had told him that the land itself chooses the moments that shape a man's path. Some moments come with the roar of thunder, others with the quiet murmur of a stream. Yet this moment, standing before a trembling woman who offered her loyalty without chains, felt like both storm and stillness. Her words' gentle pleading were not born of weakness but of strength. He could see it now, the strength to bend without breaking, to offer peace where others offered conflict. Still, his heart was restless. He had fought to keep his people free, to guard what was sacred. Could he bring her into that world without betraying it? The silence stretched long, broken only by the wind sweeping over the hills. The girl's chest rose and fell with quick breaths, her eyes glistening but unyielding. She had spoken her truth, and now it rested in his hands. He looked at her, at the fragility and the strength, and felt the weight of choice press down like the mountains themselves. For one fleeting second, he took a step closer, his shadow falling fully over her face. Her breath caught, and the world seemed to pause. Then, with a sharp breath, he stepped back again, retreating into the space between them. His heart raced, restless, torn between the duty that held him and the unknown path her plea had opened. The girl did not move. She only watched him with eyes that begged for an answer, eyes that carried the ache of 1,000 unspoken words. The prairie night closed in, the stars beginning to pierce the fading light, and the question of what he would choose hung heavy in the air. Would he accept her plea, binding their fates together beneath the wide sky of the wild land? Or would he turn away, leaving her voice to fade into the silence of the desert wind? The moment lingered, unresolved, balanced on the edge of choice, as the night swallowed the last of the sun. The story of their hearts had only just begun. But already the land itself seemed to know it would not be told without struggle, without sacrifice, without a restless fire that would not easily be put out. And there, beneath the endless stars, her plea still echoed in his ears. While his restless heart searched for an answer that would not come, the stars spread across the night like countless watchful eyes, each one glimmering with a distant fire that seemed to hold secrets older than any tribe or settlement. The woman stood still, her chest tightening as the silence between them deepened. She had spoken her truth, had let her heart bare itself without armor, and now she waited for the Apache spirit to either draw her in or cast her aside. Yet he remained there, just beyond her reach, as if the ground itself was too fragile for either of them to step closer. Her journey to this place had not been simple. She had not planned for her life to rest in the hands of a man whose people had every reason to distrust her kind. But life on the frontier rarely followed the plans a person made in the quiet hours of dreaming. She had traveled west with her family, their wagon creaking under the weight of hope. They sought new land, fresh soil, and the chance to shape a future free from the debts and hardships that had marked their lives back east. Yet the land had tested them, breaking wagons on rocky trails, stealing their cattle in sudden storms, and whispering warnings in the cries of the wild. When sickness came, it struck quickly. One by one, her family weakened, and no medicine they carried could save them. She buried her mother beneath the roots of a bent oak, her father not long after, and the younger one soon followed. Alone, she pressed on, though the wagon finally gave way and left her with little more than the clothes she wore and the hope that someone, somewhere, might offer kindness. By the time she found herself on Apache soil, she had nothing left but her voice, her hands, and the courage to speak the words that now hung between her and the warrior. The Apache's eyes, sharp and unyielding, studied her as the firelight of the stars fell upon his face. He had been raised to guard his people, to trust no settler who crossed their borders. For too many times promises had been broken and kindness repaid with betrayal. His heart, restless as the wind in the canyon, warred against the calm he tried to keep. She was not like the settlers he had known before. She did not stand tall with rifles or speak with the sharpness of entitlement. She stood small but steady, her voice trembling yet honest, and her plea had been one of offering, not demand. Still, the warrior knew that her presence among his people could bring danger. His tribe had endured loss at the hands of settlers who carved into the earth without care. They had seen rivers poisoned, sacred grounds trampled, and children taken away. To bring her among them would stir distrust, perhaps even anger. For many of his kin would see her not as a woman in need but as a threat in human form. His heart beat louder, the spear in his grip reminding him of the role he had been born into. Yet the softness of her words pulled at a part of him that had long remained untouched. She sensed his hesitation, the way he carried both strength and burden in his silence. She lowered her gaze, her voice breaking the stillness once more. "I did not come to take what is yours. I have lost what was mine. I only wish for a place where I am not alone." The rawness of her words caught him again. Loneliness was a wound he knew well. Many nights he had sat by the fire, listening to the elders' stories, while his own heart wandered far beyond the circle of flame. I'd watched friends join in marriage, children running at their heels, while he carried only the path of the warrior. Duty had given him honor, but it had left him hollow in ways he never spoke aloud. And now, before him, stood a woman whose plea mirrored the ache he had hidden deep inside. The night air grew colder, as silence wrapped around them once more. Coyotes cried again in the distance, their voices sharp against the hills. The girl pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders, her body weary from days of walking, her spirit heavy from grief. She wondered if he would leave her there, if she would become another forgotten soul swallowed by the wild. Yet she could not take back the words she had spoken, nor did she wish to. Better to face rejection honestly than to live in silence with her heart unheard. The Apache shifted his stance, his eyes lifting briefly to the stars as if seeking guidance from those who had walked before him. He thought of his grandfather's words. A man's path is not only his own. The choices he makes carry the weight of those who come after. If he turned her away, perhaps she would wander until death found her. If he took her in, perhaps he would place his people at risk. The choice felt like holding fire in his hands. Either way, something would be burned. The girl studied him quietly, noticing the way his jaw tightened and loosened, the way his breath rose and fell as though his spirit battled within him. She wished she could ease that burden, wished she could speak words that might show him she was not the enemy of his people. But all she had were the truths of her heart, and she had already laid them bare. So she waited, knowing that patience was her last strength. The prairie seemed endless, the night without end. Shadows stretched longer, and the air carried the distant sound of water moving through a canyon. Somewhere, unseen, the land itself whispered a song of endurance. The warrior felt it in his bones, that reminder that life was not made of ease but of struggle. Still, struggle could carry beauty, just as rivers carved valleys with their unending persistence. Her plea replayed in his mind, each word striking differently with each heartbeat. She had asked him to be gentle, had offered herself as a wife, not from pride, but from survival, from hope. It was not a promise of wealth or power, only of loyalty. And yet the very simplicity of her words made them dangerous, for they called to something in him he had long silenced. He stepped forward once, only to stop himself, the restless storm inside holding him back. His fingers flexed against the spear as though the weapon anchored him to duty. He wanted to ask her questions, to know her story, but the words caught in his throat. Trust was not given easily, not in this land where every kindness risked betrayal. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "I'm not asking for much, only a place to stand, only a chance to prove I can give more than I take." Her voice trembled, but she did not falter. It was the last of her strength, the last spark of faith she carried in this wild land. The Apache's heart beat like the drums at the ceremonies, steady yet filled with power. He could not turn away from what her presence stirred, yet he could not step forward without knowing what storm it might unleash among his people. His spirit stood on the edge of two paths, both uncertain, both filled with shadows. The night stretched on, and neither spoke again. The fire of choice still burned between them, its glow unseen, yet undeniable. She waited with her fragile strength, and he stood with his restless heart, both caught in a moment that would shape everything to come. And as the stars turned above, the land itself seemed to lean in, listening as though the earth wanted to know what the Apache would choose. The silence was not empty. It was full of questions, full of fears, full of a promise not yet spoken. The dawn would come soon, but the answer had not yet been given. The sky began to pale with the first edge of dawn, streaks of silver and rose spilling across the horizon. The woman had not slept, her body was weary, but her mind refused to let her close her eyes. She had watched the Apache as he stood guard through the night, his figure strong and still against the faint glow of the stars. Though he had not spoken further, he had not left her either, and that alone gave her the faintest thread of hope. Yet with each passing moment, her fear grew heavier. She did not know what his people might think of her if he brought her among them. She did not know if she would be welcomed or rejected, and even more than that, she did not know if he himself would ever allow her into the guarded chambers of his heart. He too had not rested. Sleep would not come while such a storm brewed within him. He had known many battles, many moments of danger where his life depended on sharp decisions. Yet this night had left him more unsettled than any rifle raised against him. His thoughts turned again and again to the sight of her standing before him with eyes that carried both sorrow and strength. He had tried to steady himself with the knowledge that he was a warrior, that duty must outweigh the pull of a single voice. But the land teaches in its own way, and the voice of the woman lingered like the steady rush of a river, soft yet unending. As the light grew, the sound of hoofbeats carried faintly through the air. Both turned their heads, their bodies tense. The Apache moved quickly, stepping between her and the sound, his spear angled slightly in warning. From the ridge above, 2 riders appeared, moving with care. The woman's breath caught, for she thought they might be settlers, perhaps men from another wagon train. But when the riders came closer, their faces were painted, their dark hair braided with feathers and beads. They were Apache brothers of the man who now stood protectively in front of her. The 2 riders halted when they saw her. Their eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing sharp as a blade. One spoke quickly in his own tongue, his words edged with alarm. The warrior answered in the same language, his voice low and firm. Though the woman could not understand, she felt the weight of their exchange. She could sense the riders' unease, the way their gazes darted toward her with distrust. She folded her hands tightly, willing herself not to tremble, for she knew that one wrong move could shatter the thin thread of safety that bound her to this moment. The riders finally turned their horses and rode off toward the east, their figures soon swallowed by the rising sun. The Apache lowered his spear, but his expression was harder now, shadowed by the knowledge that what had been hidden was now seen. And when they did, there would be questions, perhaps even anger. The woman wanted to ask what had been said, what it meant for her, but she kept silent. She sensed that this was not a moment for her voice. Instead, she followed when he gestured for her to move, her feet aching as they crossed the rugged terrain. Each step carried her closer to a fate she could not see clearly. And yet she walked on because to remain alone was a death she could not face. They came at last to a rise overlooking a valley. Below lay a cluster of lodges, smoke rising in thin streams into the morning air. Apache paused there, his eyes fixed on the place of his people, his chest rising with a heavy breath. The woman stopped beside him, her gaze following his. She felt the weight of what lay ahead, pressing down on her shoulders. To step into it was to cross into a life she could not easily escape. He led her down the slope, the path winding between rocks and brush. Children ran between the lodges, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Women worked near the fires, grinding grain or tending hides. Men moved with purpose, their weapons at their sides, their eyes sharp. When they saw her, the laughter faded, the work slowed, the air grew taut with silence. She felt dozens of eyes upon her, each gaze heavy with questions, suspicion, even anger. Her steps faltered, but she kept moving, close behind the man who now seemed her only shield. An elder stepped forward, his hair long and white, his eyes deep with years of wisdom. He spoke in the Apache tongue, his voice calm but firm. The warrior answered with respect, his words carrying the weight of explanation. Again, she could not understand, yet she knew this was no small moment. The elder's eyes turned to her, studying her with a gaze that felt as sharp as any blade. She lowered her head, her heart pounding, unsure if humility would be enough. The villagers began to murmur, their voices rising and falling like restless wind. Some pointed, some shook their heads. She felt the heat of their distrust pressing in, and for a moment she feared they might cast her out then and there. Yet the warrior stood tall, his voice steady as he spoke again to the elder. His tone carried no plea, only conviction, and though she did not know the meaning, she felt its strength. The elder finally nodded once, though his expression gave nothing away. The murmurs quieted, but the silence that followed was heavy, filled with the knowledge that this was not an end, but a beginning. The woman was allowed to remain, but acceptance was far from given. She knew she would have to prove herself, not only to the warrior who had stood for her, but to the people whose lives she now walked among. As the day passed, she was given a place near the edge of the camp. A fire was built for her, though none sat close. She tried to make herself small, to show respect, yet she could not ignore the eyes that watched her. Some were curious, some hard with suspicion. She felt the sting of being a stranger in a land where belonging was sacred. The warrior returned to her side as the sun lowered. His expression was unreadable, but his presence steadied her. He handed her food, a small gesture, but one that carried meaning. She accepted it with quiet gratitude, her hands trembling as she took it. The moment spoke louder than words. He had not abandoned her, though his choice had placed them both under the weight of judgment. That night, as the stars returned to the sky, she lay awake by the fire. She thought of her family, of the graves left behind, of the dreams that had carried her west. She thought of the villagers' eyes, the walls of distrust built high around her. She thought of the warrior, his silence heavy, his heart restless. She wondered if he regretted not turning her away. She wondered if she would ever be more than an outsider. In the shadows beyond the firelight, figures moved, not enemies from outside, but men of the village, their eyes sharp as they watched her. She knew then that the conflict was only beginning. She was not only a stranger. She was a test of loyalty, of trust, of the very balance between two worlds. And she could feel, deep in her bones, that the days ahead would not pass gently. The warrior sat apart, his gaze on the flames. His people whispered, his own heart battled, and the woman's voice still lingered in his ears. "Be gentle," she had said. Simple plea, but one that carried more weight than any weapon. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened, he knew that neither of them could turn back. The path had been chosen, though neither could see where it would lead. The land around them waited, vast and unyielding, holding its breath for what would come. For the true conflict had not yet begun, and both knew that before peace could be found, storms would rise. The days that followed were heavy with silence and suspicion. The woman moved carefully through the Apache village, her steps slow, her eyes lowered, her hands always busy with whatever small tasks she could find. She drew water when no one asked, gathered kindling where others had left it, and kept her fire neat as though order might somehow soften the hearts, watching her from a distance. Yet no matter what she did, she felt the weight of eyes pressing against her back. The laughter of children would quiet when she passed, and the murmur of women's voices carried sharp edges she did not need words to understand. She was not one of them, not yet, and perhaps never. The warrior carried himself as if nothing had changed, yet inside he felt the shift in every moment. When he walked through camp, men would glance at him with questions in their eyes. Some respected him, some challenged him silently. He had always been sure of his place as a protector of his people, but now that place felt uncertain. His choice to let her remain had carved a line in the sand. Some of his people trusted his judgment. Others believed he had let weakness guide him. And still, each time he looked at her, he felt the echo of her voice, the plea that had stirred something deeper than duty. Whispers grew louder as the days stretched on, rumors carried in the night like restless wind. Some said she was a settler spy, placed there to learn the ways of the Apache so her kind could strike again. Others said she was cursed, that the death of her family had been no accident but a sign from the spirits that she was not meant to belong. The woman heard fragments of these whispers, though she did not know the language, and she read the truth in the way the villagers' eyes hardened. She did not weep, though. She simply kept working, telling herself that patience was her only shield. One evening, when the firelight danced across the lodges, a group of men gathered near the elder's lodge. Their voices rose with the sound of anger, though their words were carried in the tongue she could not follow. The warrior was among them, his face lit by flame, his stance tense. She sat near her fire, her heart pounding as she watched, knowing this gathering was not small talk. The air itself seemed to carry the sharpness of a blade. The elder spoke, his voice steady, but others answered with heat. Then one younger man stepped forward, his face fierce, his hand gripping the handle of his knife. His words struck the night like arrows. The warrior answered sharply, his voice carrying over the fire. The two men locked eyes, the tension between them thick as rope pulled tight. The woman's stomach turned as she watched, knowing though she could not understand the words that they were speaking of her. Her presence was not only stirring suspicion, but dividing the very fabric of the tribe. She felt guilt pressing down on her chest, guilt for being the reason their peace was unraveling. The younger man finally turned away, though his glare lingered long on the warrior. The fire cracked, and silence settled again, heavy and dangerous. The elder dismissed the gathering, and the villagers slowly drifted back to their lodges, but the air remained charged. The warrior came to her fire afterward, his face unreadable. He sat across from her, the shadows deep around his eyes. "You must understand," he said slowly, choosing words she could follow, though his accent held the weight of his people. "They do not trust you, do not trust me, because I did not turn you away. Some would see you gone." Her hands trembled, but she forced them still. "I will not harm anyone, only wish to stay, to belong." His jaw tightened. "Belonging is not so simple. You carry the blood of settlers. To them, that is enough to mark you an enemy." She felt her throat close, the sting of tears rising, though she willed them not to fall. "What will happen to me?" she asked quietly. His eyes lifted to hers, restless, torn between duty and the pull of something he could not name. "I cannot say. But no, if you stay, you must prove yourself. Not to me, but to them. And even that may not be enough." The days grew heavier after that. Tasks were harder. Every mistake she made seemed to feed the suspicion. Once, as she drew water, a woman spat at her feet and turned away with sharp words. Another time a child threw a stone near her fire, its sharp edge glancing off the ground by her hand. Bore it all in silence, her back straight, her eyes steady, refusing to give them reason to call her weak. Yet each night when she lay beneath the stars, the fear inside her grew. What if they forced her out? What if they convinced the warrior that his choice was foolish? One night, a storm rolled across the plains. Rain lashed the lodges, thunder shaking the ground. She huddled near her fire, trying to keep the flames alive, when a figure appeared in the shadows. It was the younger man who had challenged the warrior near the elder's fire. His eyes glimmered with anger, his words sharp, though she could not understand them fully. She tried to rise, but he stepped closer, his hand reaching out as if to drag her from the circle of light. Before he could, the warrior appeared, his figure striking through the storm. His voice cut through the thunder, fierce and unyielding. The two men clashed in words, their voices sharp as the storm itself.
Oh.
The woman could not move, her body frozen, but she knew the moment was dangerous. If this anger boiled over, if blades were drawn, the fragile thread holding her in the village might snap forever. The younger man finally stormed away into the rain, his glare promising that the matter was far from over. The warrior turned to her, his chest rising and falling, his face shadowed by stormlight. "You are not safe," he said, his tone heavy. "They will not stop until you are gone, and still my heart cannot turn you away." She wanted to thank him, to tell him his words meant more than life itself, but fear kept her voice small. She only nodded, clutching her shawl tighter. As the storm passed, the conflict within the village deepened. Sides were being drawn. Some stood with the elder and the warrior, believing the spirits had brought her for a reason yet unseen. Others, led by the younger man, argued that she was a danger, that her presence would bring settlers upon them. Tension simmered in every fire circle, every whispered conversation. The air itself seemed charged, as if lightning still lingered, even when the skies were clear. The woman felt it growing closer each day, the breaking point. She knew her fate would not rest quietly. Something was coming. Some clash that would decide whether she would remain or be cast out. Perhaps even worse. And as each night fell, the warrior's eyes grew more restless, his silence heavier. His heart torn between loyalty to his people and the strange pull of the woman who had spoken to him with trembling honesty. The valley seemed smaller now, every path leading not to peace but to conflict. She could feel it in the way the younger man watched her, in the way the women whispered, in the way even the children kept their distance. Only anchor was the warrior's presence, yet even he seemed caught in a storm he could not control. And so the nights grew longer, the firelight sharper, the whispers louder. The question that had hung since the moment she pleaded with him had not yet been answered. Would he stand with her when the storm broke fully? Would his people allow it? Or would the restless fire that burned in both their hearts consume them before the dawn of peace could ever rise? The air itself felt like a held breath, waiting for the moment when everything would break. And in that waiting, the suspense deepened, pulling them both toward the edge of a choice that would change everything. The storm that had been brewing in the village finally came to a breaking point with the rising of a new dawn. The younger man, fierce and unrelenting, gathered those who distrusted the woman and demanded that she be cast out. The elder listened in silence. The people gathered in a circle, voices rising and falling with anger, fear, and uncertainty. The woman sat near the edge, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might betray her. She did not speak, for she knew her words would not carry weight among them. Her future lay not in her own voice now, but in the choices of others. The warrior stepped into the center, his presence commanding quiet, even from those who opposed him. His eyes swept over the crowd, then returned to the elder. He spoke with conviction, his words flowing like the river, steady and strong. Though the woman could not understand the language, she felt the truth of his voice. He was defending her, not with the sharpness of a blade, but with the strength of his heart. He reminded them of honor, of the balance between mercy and strength, of the teaching that the land gave shelter to all who sought it in good faith. His gaze did not waver, and his voice did not falter. The younger man answered with fire, his words cutting sharp. He warned of danger, of betrayal, of the cost of trust misplaced. His eyes burned with anger, yet beneath it lay fear, the fear that one stranger might open the door to many more, that the people he loved would be swallowed by forces greater than they could resist. Oh, his fear was not unfounded, but it was heavy with bitterness, and bitterness often blinded more than it revealed. The elder raised his hand and silence fell. His face was lined with the years of guiding his people, his voice steady as he spoke. He looked to the warrior, then to the woman, then to the circle of faces around him. His words carried both caution and wisdom. He said that trust was never without risk, but so was fear. He said the woman would remain, not because she was one of them, but because she had been brought into their path, and the spirits would decide her fate in time. The tribe would watch her, judge her by her actions, not by the shadow of her bloodline. The decision did not please all. Murmurs rose, sharp glances cut through the air, but none dared defy the elder outright. The younger man turned away with fury in his steps, his followers drifting after him. The woman felt the weight of his anger like a storm cloud that had not passed but only darkened. Still, when the elder's eyes softened upon her, she knew she had been given something rare, a chance. In the days that followed, she worked harder than ever. She rose before dawn to gather water, help tend the fires, and learned to grind grain alongside the women, though their silence often wrapped around her like a wall. She stumbled often, her hands blistering, her back aching, but she never faltered in her effort. Slowly she began to notice small changes. A child who once hid from her now lingered nearby, curious about the strange way she tied her hair. An older woman, who had once glared at her, finally nodded when she saw the woman's pile of wood stacked neatly for the fire. They were not gestures of full acceptance, but they were small cracks in the wall that had once seemed unbreakable. The warrior kept his distance during the day, for he knew the eyes of his people were on him, but she often saw him watching from afar. At night, when the camp grew quiet, he sometimes came to sit by her fire. Their words were few, for language still separated them, yet silence carried its own bond. In his presence, she felt safe, even when the shadows of doubt weighed on her. She began to understand that his restlessness was not only for her, but for the world shifting around them. He was torn between love for his people and the strange pull that tied him to her. The younger man did not let go of his anger. He watched her with suspicion, and more than once she felt his glare pierce her when she moved through the camp. One evening, as the sun sank low, she overheard harsh whispers carried on the wind. Though she could not grasp the words, the tone made her heart cold. She knew the conflict was not gone, waited like fire beneath ash. It came one night when the moon was high. The younger man and two others approached her fire, their shadows long and sharp. She rose slowly, her breath caught in her throat. His words were low, but edged with threat, his eyes hard. He stepped closer, and she knew then that patience alone would not save her. Before anything could happen, the warrior appeared, his presence cutting through the tension like steel. His voice thundered against the night, and the younger man's fury finally broke. Blades were drawn, firelight catching the shine of steel. The village awoke, people rushing from their lodges as the two men faced each other in the circle of flame. The woman stood frozen, her heart pounding as the clash of wills sharpened to the edge of violence. The younger man's rage burned hot, but the warrior's strength was tempered by something deeper, something steadier. They circled, words exchanged in their own tongue, but their eyes told the story more clearly than their voices. This was not only about her. It was about pride, about trust, about the future of their people. The elder stepped forward, his voice breaking through the storm. His words struck the ground like thunder, commanding both men to stop. For a long moment, neither moved, the firelight dancing across their faces, tension stretched so tight it seemed the night might split apart. Then, with a breath sharp as a blade, the younger man lowered his weapon. He turned away, his fury unresolved, but the fight was done. The warrior stood still, his chest rising and falling, his gaze fixed on the flames. Slowly, the crowd began to scatter, the tension lingering like smoke. The woman sank to her knees by her fire, her body trembling with relief and fear. She knew this was not an end, but a fragile step forward. Yet when the warrior came to her side, his eyes softer now, she felt the first stirrings of hope. In the days that followed, the village shifted. Some still distrusted her, but others began to see that she was not a shadow come to destroy them. The elder gave her small tasks, testing her patience and resolve. She made mistakes, but she learned quickly, and with each effort she showed, she was not there to take but to give. The younger man kept his distance, his anger still burning, but his followers began to fade, wearied by the elder's steady wisdom and the woman's quiet persistence. Seasons turned. The harshness of winter came and passed, and the woman endured it at the side of those who once scorned her. She learned their ways, their songs, their stories. And though she knew she would never be fully one of them by blood, she became part of them by spirit. Her bond with the warrior grew in silence, in small moments, the sharing of food, the meeting of eyes across firelight, the comfort of knowing that even in a restless heart there was a place of calm. In time, the woman was no longer looked upon only as a stranger. She became a part of the rhythm of the village, her presence no longer questioned with every breath. The elder would nod at her with quiet approval, and the children no longer hid from her, but laughed and played near her fire. And though the younger man never truly accepted her, his voice no longer commanded the crowd. His anger had not vanished, but it no longer held the power to decide her fate. She had proven, not with words, but with patience, labor, and loyalty, that she was not the enemy he feared. The woman often remembered the night when she had first spoken her plea, trembling beneath the stars. "Be gentle," she had said, her voice carrying all the hope she had left. She thought of how the warrior had stepped back, his heart restless, uncertain of the path before him. Now, as she stood beneath the same sky, she understood that gentleness was not weakness. It was strength, the kind of strength that bends but does not break, that endures storms without losing its light. The story of her and the Apache was not one of easy peace, but of patience, courage, and the slow shaping of trust. It was a story of how two hearts from different worlds found a way to walk the same path, not by forgetting where they came from, but by building something new together. And in the end, as the wind whispered across the plains and the stars watched from above, she knew that her plea had been answered not with swift promises, but with the quiet, enduring truth of a heart that had chosen not to turn away.